Good morning. I'm Dale Knapp. I am the Director of Research at the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Director of Forward Analytics. Um, Welcome and happy holidays. Today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the research that we've done at Forward Analytics this year, and at the end talk a little bit about what we have in the hopper for next year, which I think you'll find quite interesting. So we put out three reports this year, and to one degree or another, they're all related to our current and future workforce. The first one, Falling Behind, was a report on migration and demographics. An economic evolution looked at the kinds of jobs that we're creating in the state since 2012, which had some surprising results. And the birth dearth is kind of self-explanatory, looking at what's going on with births in the state. So I think they all kind of tie together. So I'm gonna tie them all together here, and it's essentially going to be talking about what our economy looks like now, and what these reports say about the future of our economy. Um, as we all know, Wisconsin's unemployment rate is at record lows. It's actually the lowest that it's been going back as far as we can go. So at 3%, 2018 beat out the prior record of 3.1 in 1999, and throughout the state, it's showing up in help wanted signs everywhere. In Madison, we keep getting news of restaurants closing. Typically, they're citing the lack of help, and we're going to get to that in a bit. But when you look at that and you say, okay, well, we've been here before, 3.1% in 1999. What's different? Well, there's something that's significantly different than before. So, in the first report, what I did was I created a measure to look at what our demographics look like right now that can help explain what's going to happen to our workforce over the next 15 years. And I called it the workforce replacement rate. And it's fairly simple. It says, let's look at those that are 50 to 65 right now. Over the next 15 years or so, most of them will be entering retirement. And then look at those that are under 15. Over the next 15 years or so, many of them will be entering the workforce. And so if we look at the ratio of those two, it's what I call the workforce replacement rate. And it's been fairly good at predicting what's going to happen to the workforce. And so in 1990, that replacement rate was 1.75. In other words, 175 young people for every 100 nearing retirement. Between 1990 and 2005, the workforce grew 17%. By 2000, it was down to 1.42, still plenty of coverage, and the workforce grew about 4% during 2000 to 2015. The current situation that we're in right now in terms of a workforce shortage, while we knew to some degree in about 2004, 2005, we were going to be facing some of these challenges, this workforce replacement rate made it very obvious by 2010. At 0.97, it meant we had fewer young people here in the state relative to the number that would be retiring over the next 15 years. We're at 0.97, and it's only gotten worse since then. We're at 0.87 right now. In other words, 13% fewer young people than those looking to retire within the next 15 years. A significant challenge for the state. And the way I think about that is, given that number, the only way that we're going to be able to even maintain our workforce, much less grow it over the next 15 years, 20 years, is through migration, and that's what really sparked that the first report, falling behind. Um, I wanted to look at migration patterns, whether or not we were um, improving on the historic patterns and looking really at uh, particular critical age groups. And what this shows, and it really backs up some prior work that I had done, it shows that we're not good at retaining recent college graduates. And historically, we've made up for that with the migration of young families. We've been fairly good at attracting young families. And the troubling finding from that is that's no longer the case. And let's sort of take a look at what that looks like. So migration, we can look at migration in a variety of ways and from a couple of different sources. And depending on exactly what you're trying to look at, you choose your source. And here we wanted to look at very specific age groups and how those cohorts are moving over time. So the idea is the cohort that's 15 to 19 years old in, say, 1990, over 5 years, that age group that exact cohort moves in the 20 to 24-year-old age group. And so we can look at how has that population changed here in Wisconsin over that time period. And so we can see if the 20 to 24-year-old cohort is bigger than it was 5 years ago, we've had a net in migration of that group. If it's smaller, we've had a net out migration. And we do adjust for deaths over the 5 years. And so we can look at these very specific cohorts and how migration patterns have changed over time. So this first bar chart looks at the two young workforce groups that we looked at. The 15 to 19-year-olds, which I think of as those that are going to be graduating from high school generally over the next 5 years, and the 20 to 24-year-olds who are in the base year. I think about many of them are in college as they age to 25 to 29. They're graduating college and entering the workforce. And as you can see, historically, we have not done very well with either of these age groups. We've lost, in terms of the college graduates, 95 to 2000, about 9,000 on net. In the 2000s, about 25,000 over each of the 5 year periods. So we've never been very good at that. But over the most recent period that we were able to look, that net out migration has gotten even worse. We're down to a net loss of almost 30,000 of these young people. In terms of percentage, that's 8%. 8% of that cohort we lost, over the most recent 5 year period. High school graduates, similarly, we've not been very good at attracting them as they're graduating high school and coming into the state. We've been a net loser among those. The exception is the most recent 5 year period, 10 to 15, where we've actually gained young people. I attribute most of that gain to a shift in policy at the UW system. Tuition has been frozen, their costs have been growing, and one of the things that they have done at the UW system is they have been accepting more out-of-state young people coming into the state, and so that has partially driven or turned that net migration around. So we've struggled with these populations, and generally we continue to struggle with these populations. Where we've made that up is with young families. So 25 to 44 years old, we looked at each of the 5 year age groups individually as well. 1990 to 95, over 5 years, we gained about almost 61,000 among this. It's been 17,000 to 25,000 in each 5 years in between there. And most of that net in migration of these young families was in the 25 to 34, or 25 to 29, and 30 to 34-year-old group. So um, the really one of the populations that we really want to attract. And it's not surprising. We've always been known for good schools, low crime in this state, a very high quality of life. So we've always been very attractive state for those young families. What's really troubling is that it's turned out, and we were a net loser of about 16,000 of this of this population. That's really troubling for the state. And so when you combine that net loss of 16,000 there with what we saw earlier, the 30,000 recent college graduates, um, what what you're seeing is a labor force, that is 45, 50,000 smaller, maybe even more than what it could be. And that's part of what's driving the significantly low unemployment rate in this state. There is some good news. The good news is when we look at overall migration, this is all ages, it is beginning to tick up. So if you go back from about 2005, 2004 forward, we've generally been a net loser in terms of migration. 2017 and 2018 saw that turnaround. So there appears to be some small shift in the migration, which is good news for us. Um, the challenge is these numbers are not nearly what they need to be. If you look at the Department of Administration projections for our workforce and for our economy over the next 15 to 20 years, just to essentially stay even, we needed a net in migration of over 100,000 people between 2015 and 2020. Same number between 2020 and 2025, and a little bit less than that between 2025 and 2030. So the migration issue is turning around, but it's not near, where it needs to be in order to grow our workforce over the next 15 to 20 years. So that first report, highlighted some of the challenges, some of the reasons why we are where we are in terms of the workforce, and a hint at what that means going forward. So next, what I wanted to look at was what kinds of jobs are being created. So we have this historic low unemployment rate. We've had not outstanding job growth, but very steady job growth. So what kinds of jobs are being created? And so what we did is we turned to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have estimates of employment by very specific occupations, over 800 occupations, along with their various pay rates. So what we were able to do was sort all of these occupations by their average pay, from low to high. And then what we did is we grouped them into groups of 10% of the total, or deciles. So deciles 1 to 10. And then looked at how did each of those groups of jobs change between 2012 and 2018. And what I was expecting to find from this study was that a lot of the growth was in very moderate paying jobs, the low end, maybe low to middle, and really what we found was the exact opposite. So again, these are deciles. They're sorted by average pay in each occupation. And notice at the bottom, the occupations that on average, paid $18,000 per year actually declined. So these are, the minimum wage jobs, the just above minimum wage jobs, generally don't require a lot of skills, but employment in those occupations actually declined. But when you go to the top, um, deciles 8, 9, and 10, and particularly decile 10, average pay of about $94,000 per year. Job growth was about 16% and up 9% really in each of the other two deciles. So our economy in this very low unemployment environment is kind of changing, and it's going, it's gradually moving toward high-paying, high-skilled jobs. It's going to be a slow process, but it's moving there. And I think one of the things that's going on is with this low unemployment, what we're seeing is everybody's kind of getting pushed up the wage scale to some degree, so that when you look at the very bottom, those employers that have occupations in that second decile historically weren't looking at workers with the skill sets from decile one, that they needed just a little bit more skill. Well, now they're short of workers, everybody's short of workers, and so they're increasingly looking to those workers and saying, okay, well, we can skill them up to some degree, and so they're pulling workers out of that bottom decile, and the bottom decile essentially has nowhere else to go. So I think that's part of the reason that you're seeing no growth at the very bottom, and everybody else kind of getting pulled up. When we go to that high decile, one of the things that was nice with the Bureau of Labor Statistics data is they also identify what they call STEM jobs, the science, technology, engineering, mathematical jobs, and we were able to look at what's going on with those high skill, high demand kinds of jobs. And Wisconsin is not typically thought of as an economy that has a vibrant STEM community in terms of occupations. We're generally right in the middle, a little bit below the middle. But when you look at 2012 to 2018, Wisconsin grew these kinds of jobs 13.4%, greater than the U.S. average of 11.4%, and greater. We're always comparing ourselves to Minnesota, greater than Minnesota did, 18th highest nationally. And I think that's a positive sign for our economy. We've moved up from 29th in 2012 to 25th in terms of the share of STEM jobs in this economy. When we tie that back to the migration, I think one of the things we can do is we can use these kinds of numbers to begin to think about turning around that loss of the recent college graduates. But again, people don't generally think of us as a high tech kind of economy, but we're getting there. We're gradually getting there, and I think when we get that news out, I think that can help turn that around. So for the most part, that report was very positive, which was good, because I think a lot of times the work that we do, we're identifying places where we're struggling, et cetera. And so this was really a bright spot. What it also highlights, though, when you look at the labor force and the way that economy is shifting, for counties, what it means is we're increasingly we're at a somewhat of a disadvantage, in terms of hiring, because of levy limits, because of a lot of the limitations we have, and we're trying to compete in a very, very competitive labor market. So I think, um, I hear this from counties now, and I think going forward, um, counties are going to continue to be challenged, in terms of finding employees and retaining employees. So we saw early on with the migration, um, patterns, in terms of kind of what that meant for the long term outlook for our workforce. Um, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of research that's going on of late on, declining births and declining birth rates, nationally, and to some degree internationally. And so I wanted to take a look at where Wisconsin fit into that picture, what's happening with our births and our birth rates, and and sort of why are they declining here. And again, this is a good news, bad news, in that the declining births, um, really worsens our long-term, workforce outlook. Um, but it's a big portion of it is being driven by a decline in teen births, which is, I think, generally everybody agrees is a positive. So let's look at birth. The number of births in this state is down to 64,000 in 2018. The fewest births since 1973. So if you think about the population back in 1973, significantly smaller, than what it is now, and the number of births, are below, or are where they essentially where they were at 1973. Everybody's dealing with this to some degree. Shortly after this report came out, Michigan came out with a similar report. Their births in 2018, were the lowest since the 1940s. So, um, while we have an issue, their issue is a little bit greater than ours. And this decline is being driven, by declining fertility rates. And there's a couple of fertility rates that we looked at. General fertility is very simple. It's simply the number of births, for every 1,000 women ages 15 to 44. So it's what's actually happening in terms of that. And so you see the cycle in the teal line. It generally follows the total birth number. Um, when you look at total fertility in 2018, though, at 59.2, it's still a little bit higher than it was at the low in 1997. So, that's kind of a small positive that, um, the fertility rates still have not, climbed below the 1997 levels. And we did see that after 1997, they began to shift back up. So, we're kind of hoping that's what we see. Total fertility is more of um, a hypothetical fertility rate. What it says is, if you look at a, 15-year-old girl and look at all of the age-specific fertility rates that are happening there, how many children would that average 15-year-old be expected to have, over their lifetime? And generally, a total fertility rate of about 2.06, is thought to be kind of the replacement rate, kind of what you need to just replace your population. Now, um, that's generally thought of on a national level, because on a state level, replacing your population, um, has a lot to do with interstate migration, et cetera. But, as you see, our total fertility rate, is the lowest it's been since at least 1990. I didn't have data going back, um, further than that. And so that's a problem, that we're now at, um, young women, expecting to have about 1.8 children over their lifetime. That's a long-term problem for the state. And again, this is something that's going on nationally as well. Um, as I said, though, the good news is that um, declining teen births is driving much of this. So you look at 1990 teen births at 42.4 per thousand young women, teens. By 2007, that was down to 32. But look at the 10-year decline since 2007, from 32 down to 13.8. That decline from 2000 to 2017 accounted for about 40% of the drop in births and about three-quarters of the decline in general fertility over that time. So a big chunk of what's been happening in births and fertility um, is this positive in that we're seeing fewer teen births. Um, I don't know how much lower teen births can go. But they can probably go a little bit lower. But I view this as one sort of a positive in that if most of the decline was due to this declining teen birth rate, and we can't go much lower than that. Maybe going forward, we're going to see some ticks up in birth rates and births. But the other thing that's going on, in addition to the declining births, are a delay in childbirth. And I didn't label this chart, unfortunately, but the very top orange dashed line is the 25 to 29 year olds. The solid orange is the 20 to 24 year olds. The dashed teal line, the upper one line, is 30 to 34, and the bottom teal line is 35 to 39. So what you're seeing in terms of that solid orange line, 20 to 24 year old, significant decline, and it's been a long-term decline, but really since 2007, a rapid decline in birth rates among these young women. That's coincided with significant increases in the number of young women going on to college, and so that's not terribly unexpected. The the 25 to 29 year olds has bounced around a lot, but it's generally been fairly stable over time. Um, but where you see not only a short-term increase, but really it's been long-term increases, is rising birth rates for women in their 30s. In 1990, the 30 to 34 year olds was, in terms of birth rates, the third highest birth rate. It's now second, and will probably soon pass and become, the highest birth rate among women. It's now just below the birth rate for 25 to 29 year olds. And similarly, we've seen close to a doubling, it's a much lower rate, but close to a doubling of the birth rate for women 35 to 39. So this was one indication that women are delaying childbirth, and really this is part of a long-term pattern. But I think this really shows the delay that's going on. And so this is the median age of the mother when they have their first child. And as you see, 1990, 2000, 2007, all very similar. There was some fluctuation, obviously, between each of those years. But by 2017, the median age had gone up about 2 years, and that's really a significant increase, in terms of the median in just 10 years. So we are seeing a significant delay in family formation, really, among young people. The question becomes, as they age into their 30s, are they going to have as many children as the generations before them, or because of the shortening time frame, are they going to have fewer? Um, the data on that right now are kind of mixed, and so we really don't know. Um, but here's the other piece that's going on that is really, to me, one of the most troubling um, numbers in this, in that we have um, fewer women of childbearing age. So, obviously the number of births depends on both the birth rate and the number of young women. Um, Between 2007 to 2018, women 15 to 44 was down about 41,000 in this state. Um, a lot of that was at the two ends, at the 15 to 19 and 40 to 44. Um, in terms of looking forward, the decline in the 15 to 19 is the most troubling, because one, if we have fewer of those young women in 2018 to compare to 2007, those young women are going to be aging through their prime parenting years, and having fewer of them, is a problem for the state. But we also look at what's happened to that cohort historically as they've aged over time. So if you look in 1990, that 15 to 19-year-old age group, over 15 years, we lost about 4,100 of them. The 15 to 19s in 2000, we lost about 15,000 over 15 years. And the cohort that was 15 to 19 in 2005 is now down 27,000 over just 10 years. So we have a smaller cohort in 18 compared to 2007, and we are losing them, at a faster rate. So that's a significant long-term problem for the state. Um, and so all of this, I guess, leads into the fact that Wisconsin really has a children problem. I guess that is one way to put it. So the spring migration study looked at what was happening with young families in terms of moving here, and we saw that we were um, now a net loser among young families. And what do those young families bring with them? They often bring with them children. So we look at the migration of those under 10 as they age to 5 to 14. We were gaining between 30,000 and 60,000 kids due to migration between 1990 and 2010. That number is down to about 3,400. So a significant difference in the number of kids migrating here. And you combine that with the declining birth rates, and just in 8 years, between 2010 to 2018, our under 10 population is down 43,000, almost 6%. Our 10 to 18 population is down 25,000, almost 4%. So, Wisconsin, in addition to this tight labor market and the migration challenges of adults, we really have a children problem in terms of numbers, births playing into that, migration playing into that, which becomes a workforce problem in 20 to 30 years. So I think to sort of sum up what the three studies this year kind of say is that we have a long-term workforce problem, in this state, and the migration patterns are making that worse. The birth challenges are making that worse. Yet on the positive side, our economy is evolving into a more of a high-tech kind of slowly moving in that direction. higher paying jobs, which ultimately I think is good for the state. But it also means, again, for counties, long-term challenges, in terms of finding employees and retaining employees. We did some regional look at some of this stuff. We couldn't with the jobs, but in terms of the births and the migration, um, the one thing that really stands out in the state is, the challenges in northern Wisconsin are more severe in terms of migration, in terms of losing young people, and particularly in terms of losing young women. Um, is creating a real long-term challenge for them. Urban areas are generally doing a little bit better. So finally, let me just briefly touch on what's next. Um, I was lucky enough to have an intern this summer who did great work, Jack Locavo from the University of Chicago. He's from the Madison area, but goes to school down there. So he helped put together some of the work on a big project on rural population decline. What we're looking at is rural counties throughout the country, um, trying to look at where does Wisconsin stand vis-a-vis other counties nationally. What are the consequences of decline? And what we're finding are, significant declines in workforce, in jobs, in income. So those are some of the consequences. We're looking at where our counties stand on those issues. But more importantly, the second part of the study is looking at outliers throughout the country, counties that by all measures should have been declining in terms of population. What characteristics do they have? What policies may they have implemented that have stemmed that rural depopulation? That maybe counties here that are experiencing those similar things can look to possibly stem that rural depopulation. So with that, just take a look here to see if there's so okay. So again, so thank you for your time, and I hope everybody has a happy holiday.